At Redraft in 5, we don't do introductions, but we do help you win in fantasy. Coop, we're here. We're heading into week 4. Week 3, another kind of wild one. We had some performances that were out of this world from guys we weren't expecting. We had a bunch of disappointments as well. How are you hanging in there with your teams right now?
I mean, we're scrapping, dude. And I'll tell you what, this is where you'll see this across the board in fantasy football. The teams that draft well will win a couple weeks, but the teams that scrap and are paying attention and sticking to the right details, those are the teams that win. So I have a lot of teams that are 0-2, and I look at this team or 0-3 or 1-2, and I look at this team and I'm like, this team's going to make the playoffs. I'm going to win this league. And I've got other teams, that might be 3-0, and I look at it and I say, I got to keep grinding. I got to keep working. It's the underlying info that gets you to the top, and that's what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, and we talk about this in the pre-show. It's sort of this year you got to have sort of a DFS mindset in everything. It's get through the next week, and a lot of times you get these catastrophic injuries or you get a poor performance. You can't let that be like the reason you didn't have a successful season. And that's one thing you mentioned, like grinding, like perseverance, and that's one sort of like altruistic statement in fantasy football, that every single player that's a highly successful fantasy manager year in, year out, the guy in your league that does very well, some of the high stakes winners that continually finish well every year, these players relentlessly hit the waiver wire every single week, and they try to be a week ahead of everybody. And that's what we're going to try to do here at Redraft in 5. And Coop, I think we've got to start out this week. We've got to talk about Malik Nabers. I mean, this guy looks like this could be the first season that we have a rookie finish as wide receiver 1 overall. We've had rookie wide receivers finish as top 5 scorers at the position in 3 out of the last 4 years. But this guy Nabers is a whole nother stratosphere right now.
Yeah, and I hate to take the low-hanging fruit comparison, but it reminds me a lot of the Odell Beckham Jr. year, right? I mean, the thing with Odell is he started slow because he had the hamstring in his rookie year, but he immediately, when he got ramped up, was so clearly the top player on the team. And he was so good regardless of matchup that Eli Manning just decided, you know what, Odell down there somewhere. And that's how he got the amazing one-handed catch. He was getting 10, 15, 20 targets a game. And that's what it's like with Malik Nabers right now. You've got Darius Slayton out there blocking. You've got Wan'Dale Robinson out there only playing slot in 3 wide receiver sets. Theo Johnson blocked on 40% of his pass plays in week 2. Last week, he ran a couple more routes. Daniel Jones overthrew him on a touchdown. But it's Malik Nabers and nothing else. And when it's working in those conditions, that's when you got to buy in. That's when you got to look around and say, wow, you know what? Everyone was right about this guy. He is special. Marvin Harrison Jr., also special, right? We could have a couple special guys here. So Malik Nabers being discounted because he wasn't the wide receiver 1 off the board, we can forget about that now. This guy is gangbusters.
Yeah, he's incredible. And we talked about him in our preseason prediction show right here at Redraft in 5. But it's sort of for the Dynasty watchers, a big shout out to our friends at Dynasty Trades in 5. For the Dynasty managers out there, Malik Nabers is absolutely in that discussion to be a top 3 Dynasty wide receiver at this point. I mean, there's really no difference in terms of Dynasty value with him and a CeeDee Lamb at this point, a Jamar Chase at this point. If anything, he costs more because he's doing it right away, right out the clip. And he's doing it in an offense that hasn't had high-end wide receiver production since like 2019. So it's incredible what he's doing. And you mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. had a season high in terms of targets, and he caught another touchdown pass. And we're not even talking about him right now because Malik Nabers is just so incredible. And Coop, I'll also throw in, like when they had a 4th and 1, it might have been a 4th and 2, fairly early on in the game, they used Malik Nabers on an end around, and he goes and gets like 3-4 yards just easily. So they're very self-aware of what they have. And my big takeaway this week, it's crazy. You talked about a young player who's taken the NFL by storm, and I'm going to talk to you about an old man quarterback who came off the pine and had an incredible first game out. Carolina was dead. This is a team that started out 0-2. They make the decision to bench Bryce Young. Andy Dalton steps in. And there was a lot of enthusiasm in fantasy football where managers looked at Andy Dalton as the guy that could bail their team out, whether they had a Deontay Johnson, whether they had a Chuba Hubbard, just a guy who could maybe put these guys back on track. And Coop, he didn't just do it with one of them. He did it with both of them. Deontay Johnson has 14 targets. He gets 8 catches, 122 yards, and a touchdown. And that's with Chuba Hubbard giving you 114 on the ground. And then Chuba Hubbard adds 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. So Andy Dalton did all that, and Adam Thielen caught a touchdown. Now, Thielen got hurt on that play. We don't know how long he's going to be out, but the big takeaway is Dave Canales is the quarterback whisperer. He just couldn't do it with Bryce Young because Bryce Young is so awful. So Andy Dalton is a guy where I'm sure we're going to talk about him this week on the Waiver Wire show, but he's sort of made this team fun again, and he's made Deontay Johnson into a locked-in wide receiver 2 again. So for me, it's like big hat tip to Carolina for doing this, and it was awful to see for a lot of people using the Las Vegas Raiders as a streaming defense this week. It's sort of like you got Andy Dalton. And Coop, how many quarterbacks this season have had a 300-yard passing game with 3 touchdown passes? 1, Andy Dalton. That's the only one so far. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah. I'm done trying to predict what's going to happen with the Raiders because week 1, they play the Chargers. They lose by 2 touchdowns. So then week 2, we're like, oh, here come the Ravens. We'll get Alexander Madison there. They beat the Ravens. And then they come out and lose by a double-digit score to the Panthers. Beautiful. The Raiders, unpredictable. But the Panthers, I'll tell you what, they went out this offseason and committed to winning now. I mean, they did it last year, to be honest. They went out. You don't go and sign an Adam Thielen. You don't trade for Deontay Johnson. You don't pay 2 guards $150 million or draft a running back if you're not trying to win now. So if Andy Dalton is the best quarterback on the team, he's got to be the quarterback. And they made the decision early, thankfully for them. And you know what? It's a beautiful thing for us with Deontay Johnson. It's going to be difficult to buy him right now, but he has a good matchup again this week. So for me, Deontay Johnson is getting back into my lineup. So I kept him in 1, but he was kind of on the bench because you didn't know. Now we have a pretty good idea. So all these guys are interesting. I got to ask, with Chuba Hubbard, are you looking to move him with Jonathan Brooks coming back, or are you kind of hoping that maybe rookie's the rookie and Chuba can hang on because he certainly looked pretty good?
So I think for me with Chuba, where you drafted him right now, it's sort of like I'm just going to bank the points for as long as I can use them. If it's Dynasty, I'm absolutely looking to move him. But in redraft leagues, it's sort of like I think I'm going to get RB2 production from him every week, and I'm not going to get paid like that in most leagues. Most people are going to try to buy low on Chuba from you. They're not going to give you anything that can really help you there. So unless you're like in complete dire straits and somebody offers you like a weekly tight end or a weekly wide receiver 3, then I think you just ride the storm. A potential wild card here is that they slow play Jonathan Brooks's ramp up. Where if Chuba's playing like this, they're not going to throw Jonathan Brooks out there and be like, hey, Chuba, you're playing 20% of the snap. So it could be a very slow ramp up. I do think that Jonathan Brooks is going to take over eventually, but I think that might be closer to like week 8 if they can get this sort of utility. And Chuba catching this 5 passes for 55 yards, it's very, very telling that Andy Dalton trusts him as a receiver. Chuba's a solid player. We saw it last year at over 900 yards rushing. So for me, I just think it's funny because we had that incredible run from Thielen last year where Thielen over the first half of the year looked like a league winner. Obviously tailed off with the youth, but his first game with Andy Dalton, he had 14 targets. This week, Deontay Johnson gets 14 targets. So Andy Dalton knows how to feed the horse. And it sort of was taken for granted in Cincinnati because he had such stud wide receivers. But this is a guy that doesn't mess around. He knows to go to his alpha. Deontay is the biggest winner here. Completely agree with you. If you're in a league and somebody's not valuing this performance, go ahead and buy some Andy Dalton. And for me, this is like, I just feel like Deontay, it's like such a life raft, but it's almost like, Coop, we should be suing the Carolina Panthers as fantasy managers because we want to recoup that money that we could have had in weeks 1 and week 2 with Deontay. So it was a good pick. Everybody who drafted Deontay was a good pick. The process was correct. And now you're going to start to see the results from it.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that would happen with Pat Freiermuth, with that Justin Fields would go away and Russell Wilson would take over and they'd start throwing it more. But the hottest team in football, 3-0. So I guess Justin Fields is here to stay.
And Coop, I'll say for Muth, I was looking at research this week for my Waiver Wire article and a couple other articles. And I'm like, Muth has been quiet. It's such a train wreck at tight end, but Pat Freiermuth is still like tight end 9 right now.
That's what I'm saying. I'll take it.
And the reason is, tell me this, Coop, are some of these older tight ends like dead in terms of fantasy scoring?
Maybe. I mean, boy, does it look bad, especially at the very top with Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. That's where we got to start because, Trey McBride has been solid. Like, talk about the top dogs. And again, we're recording today, so we'll have to see what Dalton Kincaid looks like. But, 5 catches for Kincaid, 6 for Laporta. I mean, Laporta, the scary thing for Laporta is that you look at Kincaid through the first 2 weeks, the Bills only attempted 42 passes. The Lions attempted 84, and Laporta still only had a couple catches. Now he's got the ankle injury, but Andrews and Kelsey are the ones that really scare me, because when you have the age cliff factored in too, it's not a matter of like, oh, game script or this or competition. It could be a matter of these guys don't deserve the targets anymore. So it is a little scary, especially with Mark Andrews. I worry that, and again, we don't have a huge amount of data on it because it's such a new surgery, but this tightrope ankle surgery brings guys back quickly. That's the miracle in it, is that you can come back and play right away. But a lot of reports suggest that it takes you a long time to get back to 100%. So you could have the surgery and come back and play in like 2 months. But some of these guys, like for instance, Tony Pollard and Darnell Mooney, said that they didn't feel right. Tony Pollard said he didn't feel right until week 11 of last year. And now we watch those guys this year, and Darnell Mooney looks great. Tony Pollard looks great. And Mark Andrews, coming off the first year off that surgery, does not look good. So for now, Mark Andrews has to go off the bench. I know it's the game script was obviously all Derrick Henry, so they probably didn't feel the need to have this guy in there. But just the fact that they looked at it and said, let's rest this player and have him only run 6 routes, nightmare. And then Travis Kelce, like the Chiefs in general look like they're still got the Super Bowl hangover. I know they're 3-0, but they're playing lazy. The lazy interception thrown by Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce not squeezing the ball, getting it stripped out of his hands on what normally would be a nice little catch and run.
An automatic play for him in most
automatic play.
Just like what's going on?
In past years, he would have caught that ball and shrugged that guy off. And yesterday, it just gets. I know he kind of got chopped in the neck a little bit, but I mean that's football, man. You got to make. That's the difference between making the play and not. And he used to make those. We'll have to see with Kelce, but again, the problem you run into with Kelce is you look around this landscape. Who are you going to start? Who are you going to start in place of him? With Andrews, it's dire enough that you have to find somebody else. With Kelce, I think a lot of people are going to have to sit back and just suck it up, man. So it's a tough landscape out here. We're doing the best we can. And again, check out the waiver show. That's also on this channel. We're going to have it posted, and you can see who we're going with from the bottom of the barrel if we have to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Mandrews is super troubling. You have to wonder, why on earth is he out there? If there is a situation where he's this banged up that they want to play him on this few, and also Coop, I think what's telling is it's trending down, because week 1 against the Chiefs, he's playing so many snaps. We were sitting here talking about the use of 12 personnel and how he's on the field. Don't worry, Mandrews is running all these routes. He's on the field the whole time, to going to week 3 in a game that the Ravens had 0 problem scoring points, and Mandrews is not on the field. So for me, it's like, why not just put the guy on the IR, let him go get healthy, and let Isaiah Likely and a number of other tight ends they have just get snaps? And for me, I wonder for you, Likely did nothing. Likely had the big week 1, then like he's had like 2 straight weeks of like less than 5 PPR points. But I just think with the way that Andrews we're seeing diminishing snaps, diminishing routes, maybe it's time to just kick the tires on buying Likely super low just in case. You've seen this with Mandrews where he misses time and Likely goes ham. Could be the case this year.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think the problem you run into is that Andrews probably feels healthy, right? Because the surgery's over, it's done. It's just getting back up to 100%. It's like, and again, there's not a lot of data on it, but I will tell you this. There's a reason that Mac Jones had an opportunity to have this surgery, and he said no, because he saw what both Tua and Jalen Hurts had it when they were in college at Alabama. He saw what they went through in the recovery and how invasive a surgery is and how nasty it gets. And he said no. And Jalen Hurts actually had an ankle injury with the Eagles a couple years ago where they had to go in and remove all the hardware. So it's such a new thing. It's a little scary, some of the complications that could come from it. So Andrews, honestly, versus a guy like Pollard, who is doing so much running and the running back position is so in tune with like explosiveness, he knew that the explosiveness wasn't there for him. I just wonder if Andrews thinks he's at 100% and we're all watching him and we know he's not, so I don't know. It's a very weird situation, but I think you're right. I think they got to sit back and watch the film and say, hey man, take this train off the tracks for a little bit and focus on getting you all the way back up to 100% and then bring you back. And if that is the case, then Likely has an opportunity to go crazy just like he did last year for the last few weeks when he was a top 5 tight end.
And speaking of going crazy, like we could have gone in a number of directions, and we talked in the pre-show about our big takeaways from the week, but I'll go with sort of a low-hanging fruit here. Saquon Barkley right now looks like the league winner I think if we were drafting once again and we were having a traditional PPR draft, Saquon is probably the number one overall pick if we were drafting once again. The Kellen Moore offense, the Philadelphia experiment with Saquon Barkley has surpassed even like the biggest Barkley enthusiasts' expectations. This is the second game this year that he's gone for over 30 points scored. He also does it in come from behind manner against the New Orleans Saints, who, like last week, we were talking about the Saints buzzsaw, and the Saints defense really, really took it to Philadelphia for a large portion of the game. They knocked Devonta Smith out of the game, and then Barkley gets a walk-off touchdown where basically just looked incredible, looked like peak Saquon. And the 230-point weeks that he scored in 3 games, like his one game in the loss to Atlanta, he still gets you 95 yards rushing. So like even his games where the scoring is not quite as high, he's still giving you high-end RB1 production. And he's had back-to-back weeks with 4 receptions. So the whole notion that Philadelphia is not going to target a running back, they're doing it just enough. Barkley's doing it with touchdowns. He's doing it with rushing, but he's got a floor with the reception totals. Like, he's playing at such a high level. And now, Coop, you've got AJ on the mend, Devonta Smith, we don't know what's going on there. Dallas Goedert has a really strong game, but it looks like Saquon Barkley, like if you drafted him at the turn, you're looking about as strong as it gets in terms of your expectations for the rest of the season.
If you double tapped Barkley and Jonathan Taylor at the turn, boy, did you have a heck of a week this week. My goodness.
Oh, man. And that was like the square move. That's like the one where people were saying that's the square. Don't go double tap at the. Right. And I talked to a lot of people about, like, people felt it at a disadvantage this year drafting at the 12 spot in a number of formats. Like, we talked about it when we drafted an NFFC team. We talked about it when we drafted an FFPC team. Like, and the win rates are actually very, very high right now for, those spots, because those spots resulted in Saquon Barkley for a lot of managers. So it's truly remarkable what he's doing. And you see this keeping up. Do you think this is, we're looking at a Saquon RB1 overall season? What's your expectations for that?
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. And I mean, and you got to consider, in hindsight, a lot of these things make so much sense. But when it had, like, we're still in week 3. Like, you can still go out and try and buy these guys before people realize. Same with Alvin Kamara. Like, Alvin Kamara, brand new scheme. He's looking great, right? He's looking revitalized. Saquon Barkley's on a new team, man. The Giants were sucking the life out of everyone. I mean, surprise. Evan Engram and Saquon Barkley are good. What was the common denominator there that was holding them back? It was the New York Giants, right? And what we're getting here is, I'm calling it break up Saquon, right? You break up with the old girlfriend, you hit the gym, you want to prove to everybody that you're the man still, right? Like, he clearly went out and said, hey, I want to be on the better side of this. I know how embarrassing it is when you go to a different place and then that team crushes without you, right? And you look at, I know Joe Mixon's hurt, but like Joe Mixon is doing well when the Bengals weren't. And it's like, you want to be on the right side of this. And I think Saquon Barkley, a guy who has for years and years talked about his legacy and how he wants to leave a lasting mark on this game and how he wants to become a commentator and talk about it after. He's even said, like, you can only play football so long, but you can talk about it forever. Like, this guy deeply cares about the game. Of course, he was going to put in the work. And my goodness, he looks like he's having fun again. It reminds me of all the Penn State clips where he's like going, you know what I mean? Like, he's doing that again. It's back. Prime Saquon Barkley is back, and you got to jump on it now and pay the price. Pay up if you have to. If you can get the guy, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and this is a situation where, because of the quality of the offense, I think this is in redraft a Bijan to Saquon pivot. If you can get that done, I'm doing it. And the threat behind him, no one else is getting touches among that Eagles backfield. This has been a coach that's been synonymous with running back by committees, and no one is getting touches. I mean, no one. Like, Saquon's getting 100% of the touches. And when you look at Breece Hall, who's also playing at an exceptional level, Breece Hall is going to concede touches every week and concede potential touchdowns to Braylon Allen, who looks like a monster. So Saquon has the least amount of threat behind him, and he's also got a tremendous offensive line. And hey, man, they're 2-1. That Atlanta loss, they could easily be 3-0.
I mean, you can go right down the list. Devon Achane lost his quarterback.
Yep.
You know what? Jahmyr Gibbs looks great. So does David Montgomery.
Yes,
they tell me he can't score a touchdown every week. When does it stop? because last year, besides the one game he got hurt in, he scored 13 touchdowns in 13 games. Now he's got 3 in 3 games. It's like when you look at the obstacles, right? And then, of course, the Saints this week looked human after looking superhuman. But, and again, Barkley is younger than Kamara. So when you're talking about who is in the driver's seat to be the RB1, it's undoubtedly Saquon Barkley.
So, Coop, we talked about Barkley, and I'll agree with you. Like you said, the Alvin Kamara. This is a nice opportunity to go in and buy Kamara because the Saints are going to come back and they're going to score. That was a weird game. Turnovers.
Weird game.
Rashid Shaheed drops a touchdown.
They were missing their glue. They're missing their glue guy, dude.
Taysom Hill. The
glue guy. That's
But if we believe in New Orleans, like losing a 3-point game to Philadelphia at the end, that game could have flipped the other way. I'm into kicking the tires on some Kamara trades, but who's a player this week that you're looking to go out and try to trade for in your redraft leagues?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm buying all the Saints, honestly. But, and again, that's a game script thing. When you look at the lack of passing and the lack of total snaps, like a team like the Bears ran 90 snaps this week, and the Saints have been behind on that. So I'm buying all those guys. But one guy specifically that when I went back and I combed through the usage and looked at the data and kind of looked at the overall situation, Jackson Smith-Njigba is a guy that I'm looking to buy. Again, he had the big week the week before last, and you couldn't buy him. And then this week he had a down week where I think you should buy him before next week when he goes and plays the Lions, where out of the slot you had Cooper Kupp go crazy, you had Chris Godwin go crazy. This week, Greg Dortch played on a bum hamstring and still got 6 targets, right? This is a spot where JSN can go off. And when you go and look at the numbers, the flippening has happened. JSN is playing ahead of Tyler Lockett now, right? DK Metcalf is the top dog. JSN has played ahead of Lockett. Lockett is the part-time player that only comes on for 3 wide receiver sets. Lockett is wearing a brace on his knee for a patellar tendon, which is the scariest injury in all of football. I mean, you go down the list of players that if it does, and again, knock on wood, but a torn patellar tendon, guys like David Boston, Gerard Mayo, Victor Cruz, Cadillac Williams, the list of guys that had it and didn't come back and play ever again is longer than the list of guys that did come back. It's basically like Jimmy Graham and Jim Leonard that did. So patellar tendon issues are nothing to mess with, man. So for me, I think JSN is going to play ahead of Lockett all year, and in the right matchups, which this week is, he's going to go off. And if he goes out and has double-digit targets this week and has 2 games with double-digit targets in the first 4 games, he's going to be unobtainable. Whereas right now, he has 2 bad games and 1 good game, and you can actually buy him. So JSN, I'm grabbing him right now before it goes crazy, because I think the Seahawks are actually one of the best offenses in football. People don't want to admit it, but they're 3-0, and they look good, and they looked good without Kevin Walker. So what more do you want, right?
Yeah, and you made a great point on the quality of the offense. Like, we trust the offensive coordinator. We trust Ryan Grubb. Yes. We talked about it last week. And the fact is, DK Metcalf had a monster game, and Zach Charbonnet had 2 touchdowns. So this game could have tilted slightly differently. They also were in control of the game where Miami couldn't get a thing together. So Seattle's 3-0. We trust the offense. JSN is not a different player than he was 7 days ago. And 7 days ago, he looked completely incredible. There's going to be game strips that call for him. I love the fact you're talking about the slot. And the Seahawks are 3-0, but I'm going to talk about the now 2-1 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is, if you're in a suicide pool, a lot of people are done because a lot of people are backing Tampa against Denver. This is one where I had Tampa Bay as one of my defensive streamers this week. I was all in on Tampa Bay beating Denver. It's the NFL. Funny things can happen. A big hat tip to the Denver Broncos. Apparently, Tyler Batty's proper pronunciation is Tyler Bidet. That's the only thing I really learned about Denver on that side. But when it came to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Bucky Irving had his 3rd straight game where he outrushed Rachaad White. And he actually outcarried him 9-6. But the rushing yardage was just such a wide gap between the productivity. Bucky Irving averaged 7.8 yards per carry against the Denver Broncos. Rachaad White averages 2.8. On the season, Bucky Irving is averaging 6.2 yards per carry right now. Yesterday, we saw him have 3 catches. And now we're hearing from Todd Bowles that Bucky Irving has earned a larger role moving forward. I'm looking to try to trade for Bucky Irving in every single Dynasty league I can and every single redraft league I can. I think Bucky Irving, we talk about the flippening. It's hard to stomach the flippening happening with Rachaad White for us as fantasy managers, because Rachaad White was a guy that gave us such goodwill, such a reward for drafting him last season. But at the end of the day, Bucky Irving is just more effective in this offense than Rachaad White is. Rachaad White is still being propped up by his usage as a receiver. He had 6 targets yesterday, and he had 18 receiving yards. But at the end of the day, Bucky Irving led the nation in receptions in college last year at Oregon. And I think Bucky Irving, this could be the next like sub 200-pound running back that just goes nuts in this league. You've seen it with James Cook. You've seen it with Jahmyr Gibbs. You've seen it with Devon Achane. You've seen it with Kyron Williams, where these lower BMI guys are being highly effective. I don't think Bucky Irving is ever going to be a true bell cow. He can't handle the sort of volume that Rachaad White did last year. But in a split backfield, I think Bucky Irving could end up being a weekly RB2 for us with spike week potential because of his explosiveness. I'm looking to kick the tires, looking to buy high on Bucky Irving on the chance that we see a real flip here. And if Rachaad White went down, Bucky Irving is going to just go nuts.
Right. And, you see it with the league. They're trying to make the game safer, getting rid of the helmet to helmet. They get rid of the horse collar. They get rid of the hip drop. It allows for some of these smaller guys to play the game. I mean, like a guy like, can you imagine 2002 NFL football watching a guy like Tank Dell out there? Like he would get destroyed because
he wouldn't have been on the field. Wouldn't have been on the field.
You could just grab guys back then. Like the Patriots used to just grab Marvin Harrison Jr. And then they made rules against that. You know what I mean? Like they've made the game easier on offense, and you're going to see it translate to some of these smaller, faster guys being able to stay on the field. So it's very interesting. And I'll tell you what, if you're a Bucky Irving fan, this is exactly what you wanted to see, because winning teams don't make changes the way that losing teams look around and they say, where's the weak link in the chain? If the Panthers were 3-0, Bryce Young would be playing. They look around and say, who is not pulling their weight? We just lost to the Broncos. Where's the change that needs to be made here? And Todd Bowles coming out and talking to the media is a classic Bruce Arians move, where he is talking to Rachaad White. That's what he's doing here. He's saying, we lost today, and Rachaad White didn't do his job. And we got this other guy who's doing his job. So heads up, Rachaad, that it's coming, right? And these teams will use the media to do that. That's straight from the Bruce Arians school of coaching, where he's like, he's done that. He used to do that with the Cardinals all the time. He'd say something to the media that was clearly a message to his players. That's what Todd's doing here. And it's only a matter of time before the more effective guy starts getting the more touches. And we've already seen it in carries.
Yeah, and you've seen it time and time again. You've seen this story. The Jalen Warren cuts into Najee Harris. Right. Tony Pollard cuts into Zeke Elliott. Austin Eckler cuts into Melvin Gordon. The traditional, larger bell cow type back always has the leg up. The smaller back, usually it's sort of like, can he handle it? Seems like he can really handle it. And they really love him here. And it's only game 3 for Bucky, and he's had 2 really strong ones out of 3. So we're on top of it. Coop, who is your hammer that people can lean on, whether it's DFS, whether it's just a smash, a guy who's going to absolutely smash here in week 4?
Yeah, I'm going back to the tale as old as time with Mike Evans. Mike Evans is awesome. He's a Hall of Fame player. And we were trying to fade him last week where we could, going against Patrick Surtain, because going up against certain death has been a problem for everybody. And that's what Patrick Surtain's been. So throughout his whole career, Mike Evans has been that guy. When he goes against Marshawn Lattimore, they get into fistfights and he's kicked out of the game, right? It's like you can get him off his game if you have an elite corner. Well, the Eagles right now have not been playing that way. They're actually a bottom 3 team in DVOA against the wide receiver ones. So as much as we've been leaning on Chris Godwin, when Evans has a tough matchup, we go back to the well with Evans when he plays against a team that's been allowing players to score and players to make things happen. And we just watched it. Even though the Saints didn't look great, Chris Olave did look good for once and caught 6 of 6 targets and scored a touchdown, right? Mike Evans this week is going to go out there and, in my opinion, look great once again. And this is going to be a high over-under game, and hopefully it fits the bill and we see the shootout we're hoping for. But I think Evans is going to have a get-right game here, so I'm hammering Evans. What about you, buddy?
So for me, I'm going to go, top of the food chain, and a player that we're really going to hang our hat on, and I'll make a prediction that this is his first game where he finishes as a wide receiver 1 overall. And this is going to be the Marvin Harrison Jr. game. We've seen it in back-to-back weeks where we had the 2-touchdown performance, a near 3-touchdown performance against the LA Rams. That was the sort of the sigh of relief game. And then last week we saw the big high target total plus another touchdown catch. And that was a huge frustrating game for Arizona. Kyler Murray could have done a little bit better in that game. Trey McBride, possible concussion, and they lose to the Lions. And it's also like the Lions pretty much controlled that game. I think that Arizona is going to take it out on the Washington Commanders. The Washington Commanders are going to be on a short week. Commanders play in Cincinnati. Then they have to go up against a potential buzzsaw in Arizona coming off of a loss. I think we see Marvin Harrison Jr.'s first ever wide receiver 1 overall performance. And we don't really need to go back too far. Like, Washington is your get right game for quarterbacks. It's also your get right games for number 1 targets. It's usually a get right game for a number 1 wide receiver. Some games it's a wide receiver 2 who also smashes. And we even had a random Darren Waller New York Giants game where he smashed. Like, a top target rips Washington to shreds, and it goes back like 15 out of the last 16 weeks. So Marvin Harrison Jr. against Washington on a short week. This is wide receiver 1 overall. And if you want to talk about a potential DFS stack that could feed families for years, it's Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., figure out the rest. Easy game, simple game, Coop. Just start your Cardinals next week against Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned DVOA. They're obviously dead last against the pass. And they're bottom 4 against, as you mentioned, wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s. And this team, the Cardinals, like, you got to remember, Greg Dortch dealing with a hamstring. Michael Wilson is fine. Like, I think Michael Wilson's a good player, but he's not going to emerge and be, a superstar here. And Trey McBride dealing with a concussion. So keep an eye on that, because Trey McBride took a pretty bad shot here, and concussion protocol can go either way. He could be back out there. He could miss, multiple weeks. We're hoping he doesn't, but especially if no Trey McBride going against these corners, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go bonkers. For
sure. Now, stick with us here at Redraft in 5. We're going to cover you with videos like this all season long. And make sure you're checking out our Waiver Wire Advice. Every week, Coop and I are going to drop a Waiver Wire show. In about 10 minutes, we're going to tell you the players you need to add every single week. We're going to see you next week at Redraft in 5.